Rome season 1 episode 9 Utica is over, but here on post show recaps we are just getting started. My name is Grace, but of course I'm not alone. I'm here with a man who has a tolerant spirit. It's DM Philly. Philly, how you doing?
I'm good. My tolerant spirit is very excited to talk through this episode of Rome, Grace.
Yes, you and I think both under the weather. Is it too much Rome? Have we ingested too much Rome? I know I just had Thanksgiving weekend up here in Canada, so I might just be, I guess I'm completely giving away when this episode was recorded, but nevertheless I might just be full on turkey.
Yeah, the turkey might be getting you.
Yeah.
I think it might be like not enough Rome, Grace. I think that if
Mm.
I had more Rome in my system, I would be impervious to the weakness that has infiltrated my body. I
Mhm.
think that if I were blessed by the gods of Rome, perhaps I would be strong enough to endure through this sickness and would have been able to fight it off. So probably I think I need more Rome.
Yeah. So I watched this episode just before I was going to head over to my brother's house and hang out with him for the day. I was like, I just got to watch an episode of Rome and then I'll be over. And I got over and he's like, how was it? And I was like, there was a lot of incest in this episode. So, it was interesting. And my brother's brother-in-law was also there, if that makes sense. And he said, so, well, how much incest do you tolerate? I said, typically if somebody says, hey, incest is bad, that's what I tolerate. But this one, quite a lot of incest.
Oh yeah, we're connecting straight to like our Westeros kind of
Yeah.
DNA there on HBO. The incest is real. I mean, not as much incest as a Game of Thrones, certainly way less than House of the Dragon. So
True.
I mean, like it's a moderate amount of incest. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about it. Make sure you're subscribed here. We're chatting about Rome every single weekday here in October, as it is the fall of Rome. postshowrecaps.com/Rome. We are nearing the end of season 1, although season 1 has 12 episodes. We still have a few more to go. But still, your ratings and reviews are much appreciated, especially subscribe. Make sure you don't miss an episode. All right, Rich. I'm going to give a little bit of a quick plot recap here. Basically, Rome is at peace as Cato and Scipio are on the run, but ultimately both kill themselves, commit suicide. One to himself, Scipio asks his servant to slit his throat, and therefore Caesar is able to celebrate Rome is in peacetime. They throw a party. Servilia is a little bit worried about Brutus's her placement in all of this happenings, as well as Brutus's, but he decides that he will continue to abide by Caesar's doing, as he has won the war. Meanwhile, Servilia learns about Caesar's affliction and would like to get her new lover, Octavia, to get Octavian to spill the beans, and basically by any means necessary, including seducing her brother. She does not want to do this until she learns that her mother was responsible for Glabius's death, and therefore she does end up doing this, only for Attia to then find out that it happened. Alas, Varenus is going to be is offered a position, as well as Octavian is offered a position as a pontiff. Varenus will be a magistrate. Varenus has to fight off an attack potentially from this is Erastes, the man who was going to offer him a loan, I believe, earlier in the series. And after Varenus stops a man from having his nose sliced off, the man is going to come and confront him. But when the man sees Caesar's guards at the door, the man wanders off. And I think that's basically it. Pulo's kind of getting drunk and not sure what he wants to do with his life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Pulo's got some real marriage envy happening. I think I like missed the opportunity to start the podcast by chanting "Happy Day,
Happy
Happy
day.
Day,
That's right.
Happy Day." We got like a little play within the show, which is always fun.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a really interesting episode. Like Italians often will talk about the poor depictions of Italians in media. Certainly,
Mhm.
I think it was much more common 15 years ago. But I did have to laugh to myself that we're like in ancient Rome, and I kind of forgot that we have to do the mob boss storyline with
Uh-huh.
Erastes.
Uh-huh.
We're gonna like make sure that we get a little La Cosa Nostra in ancient Rome. So I thought it was a pretty interesting episode, the way that they like play with our expectations as we return home after this campaign far afield.
Yeah, I do think this is an episode that I said this at the beginning, I think, and I think it's the premiere episode where I thought it was interesting how separate everything is, and then it ties together quite
Mhm.
nicely. I think this is an episode that does this as well because you kind of have everything that's happening with Varenis and Pulo, and the way that Varenis' story obviously then ties back into Julius Caesar and who's going to continue to be involved with him. Even Pulo's story, to an extent, is kind of talks about how he was born from slaves, and so he does not want to bow down to a man who has basically made himself a dictator. So that ties in. And then also you have the way that Servilia, Octavia, Attia, that also all twines in with Julius Caesar. Basically, the only man missing from this episode really is one Mark Antony. But yeah, for the most part, I feel like the episode is tied together really well.
It is. We also covered a lot of time. We've like talked about the kind of nebulous time movement, but the whole like Octavian coming back to the city and like you've been gone for 2 years. Like we've
Right.
had a pretty quick, I mean, not really, kind of the last couple of episodes have conveyed what's been going on over that 2 years. But I really appreciate that in terms of the way that, again, I keep bringing it up. It's probably because of the incest, but the Game of Thrones of it all, of like the teleport by map that
Mm-hmm.
starts to happen late in the day. I appreciate
Mm-hmm.
them giving us a little context for like we didn't just like zip down to Egypt and like come
Right.
back the next week, right? It's been 2 years. It's been enough time for a lot of these relationships to advance. Yeah, I think that you really feel that with like Octavia and Servilia and
Mm-hmm.
the kind of the familiarity that they've established with one another. And I think it puts an interesting spin on like the Glabius beats of it all. I couldn't help but like laugh a little bit of like that bastard Glabius, like still ruining things, Grace, after all the way from the beginning, you know.
I know. I keep waiting for the fact that Niobe's baby is not her daughter's baby
Oh
to
no,
come
that's
up.
not going to come back to haunt us, right? That can't possibly. That's just a little like fun fact for us
Yeah,
to keep in our bonnets as we go.
I would not have put money on the fact that Glabius is name dropped sooner than Niobe's baby. I want to start maybe at the beginning here as we get Cato. Where we start, I believe his like forces. They've like he's like basically on his last legs. He has like just a
Mhm,
few men left. Literally an elephant like dead, keeled over, maybe not dead yet, but he says once it gets knocked over you can't get it back up, so
mhm.
essentially it's dead. And the scene where Cato urges Scipio, like, go make peace with Caesar, like, go surrender, you'll be fine, you're good, I'm gonna go in the other room, I'm gonna kill myself. And then Scipio ultimately asking a man to do the same thing to him to end his life. Basically this is a setup. It's interesting that the episode is called Utica because this is where they like they're gonna go
Mhm.
try to hide out. And really it's just the opening scene here that basically then I guess sets up the rest. Everything else that's happening is like this is sort of the last thing Caesar needed to be able to, as long as the two of them are out there they could potentially summon an army. But it's interesting that it's the name of the episode and really it's just this opening scene where it's like, I don't know, what do you make of this scene here with like Cato and Scipio?
I think it's interesting because it reframes where we find characters like Brutus, right?
Right.
I mean, like it's clear, like setup of like, okay, this is the last piece falling into place. To your point, to allow Caesar to like seize control as he does of Rome, and kind of like the last of his resistance falls away. But the idea of honor, and I think that like it's playing in both ways, where you have like Erastes coming to Varanus of like, this man has dishonored me, he's spoken dishonorably to me. Tomorrow he will come and like publicly kiss my feet, right? Like I'm making a hard left turn to get back to the Utica of it all, which is the notion of like, this is where Cato finds himself, right? Like Scipio's kind of saying to him, like, oh, we're still alive. Like, don't be so glum. As long as we live, there's yet hope. And Cato's got this great retort of like, I think that we have proven the like fallacy of that like statement, Scipio, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
are without hope. There is nothing left for us. We cannot, like, finally, these guys have kind of accepted the reality of the situation in that they're never going to be able to rally enough forces to like offset Caesar at this point. They can remain a thorn in his side and problematic, but they're not going to be able to like win. And ultimately that leaves Cato of like, yeah, I'm alive, but what is my life like without honor, without hope? I'm going to like end it. And I think that that like creates this fascinating context to come back to Brutus, who's going to talk to Servilia later in the episode, of like, I am ashamed. I have no pride. I am like a husk of a man. And in the absence of an honorable suicide, like, you'll have to settle for that, mother, you know? And
Yeah.
I've been a real champion of Servilia, but we see like the machinations of the web weaver here, right? Again, with like the Game of Thrones of it all, she shifts like, you know, one shade closer to like the golden throne of Cersei Lannister, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like these people just being kind of pawns to her, the way that she exploits the relationship with Octavia, and like so callously receives Brutus's pleading for like, please don't look at me with this contempt in your eyes. Like, I live with this contempt in my soul every day for myself.
Right. One thing I think it's very interesting is Utica, I believe the sort of like Tunisian city doesn't exist anymore. So I think that that's also interesting. Obviously, there's
Yeah,
Utica in New
that's
York.
fascinating.
Yeah, this idea that like that's where Cato, that's basically where like the not like the defense of the Republic basically ends, right? It's these last two men who are on the hideout who could potentially gather an army to fight Caesar's dictatorship. Utica is the place they die, and that place no longer existing. I think it's just an interesting little fun fact. I feel like there's a
It's
metaphor in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, right? Like these like vestiges that fall away to history or whatever. I like joked about it yesterday, but you know, there's a lot of towns near where I live that are named after these ancient Roman cities,
Mm-hmm.
ancient Greek cities. Rome, New York, notoriously was the site of like Woodstock in 2000 or 99. I'm sorry. Utica is like a couple hours away. So like these places, these are very common names to me in like my everyday. And that's not something I was at all aware of, that the actual Tunisian city is like gone. I love the little depiction that we get of Utica, like the cramped streets and the people kind of like spying them from the alleys as they go to like find shelter there or whatever.
Yeah, agreed. Um, you talked about Brutus and Servilia. I do like this scene a lot. The scene you mentioned where Brutus is gonna basically go and like, look, this is the situation I'm in. Like, I'm not gonna kill myself. You know, he's seemingly good, and so yeah. And I like the fact that she says, and I do think this is just in terms of like I feel like I've rooted so hard for Sevilla so far. I think similarly to you that she's, you know, she's sleeping with Caesar and he's sort of like, you know, Atia is just the worst. So you look great in comparison to Atia, right?
Oh yeah.
And then yeah, and then Caesar breaks it off because of Atia. So you feel bad for her. She, you know, puts the curses on these two houses. I love the last line that she says to Brutus. She says, "My objection to Caesar is political, not personal." And yet when Servilia is going to be like, or sorry, not Servilia, sorry, Octavia is going to sort of drop the fact that Caesar is afflicted with something. She's like, "What is it? Well, tell me, please. Did my curse work?" Is how I felt. She was like, I think my curse worked. Even though the timing of that, I don't think like totally adds up, but we never get it. She never gets into the details. Like, when exactly was this? It's just kind of like, "Ooh, Caesar has affliction. Maybe he perhaps has been cursed by the gods, just as my request went through the paper." They never inform you when the curse goes through. You know, you don't get a letter
No.
back, you know? So I like that. And then yeah, this like pushing, this incessant pushing. And the thing I also think that I really liked about the Servilia stuff this episode is I really loved the scene with Octavia and Servilia when they're talking about how much Caesar is, she's still like enamored with him in some way. And
Mhm.
she's like, I can't, it's not quite Brokeback Mountain. I can't quit you, you know, but it's unclear whether I think to me anyway, whether she's like, I'm still in love with him, but he spurned me. So I'm never going to go back to him, but I just want, you know, I want to know this information. She's even alluding to like whether like, you know, Octavia having other love, you know, the fact that she'd propose, like, seduce your brother.
Mhm.
I think it's just like very interesting. And it goes back to this thing we've been saying is like, I feel like the best TV shows understand that people are incredibly complicated. And the more sort of, and it's so hard to convey in a TV show because we want to sit down and we want to be able to watch an hour long TV show and understand it and not be sitting there thinking, you know, what the heck is good? Like, I thought she's in love with Octavia. It's like, well, she is, but also like, she's not the one who broke it off with Caesar. He broke it off with her. So like, yeah, it's like very interesting and complicated. I just like the way that all the scenes play out where basically she's asking, and then if you question whether or not she likes Octavia or not, because she's like,
Mhm.
has she been doing this as such a long ploy to get something out of this relationship? Because that doesn't seem like what it was at first, but it seems like 2 years in, maybe that's what it feels like.
No, I mean, a couple of days ago, I asked you about whether or not we thought that Caesar truly lamented the loss of his friend in
Right.
Pompey, or whether or not he was like being authentic to Brutus when Brutus came back and like he takes him back into the fold. And you were like, no, I think it's like political motivation. But we talked about the fact that, like, more than one thing are driving us at the same time. Like, humans are fundamentally really emotional creatures. We just spent a couple of months like going back and rewatching Dark, Grace, and like so often you come to these conclusions of like, well, this is the obvious logical course of action, but these people are not behaving within that logical course of action. They're emotionally motivated and they're making choices that like directly contradict their own interests and like cut their own legs out from under them. And I think it's a fundamental truth about humans. And I think it's really exceptional when that's articulated well in storytelling, right? Like, fundamentally, I think that we are supposed to feel like she's got this affection for Octavia. Maybe she's in love. Maybe it is just like the physical passion of it all, whatever it is. Like, I think both things can be true at the same time. They don't invalidate one another, that she cares deeply for this girl and is willing to like utilize her as a tool to like get her vengeance, right? That like she's in this new relationship, but she's not over the old one. Like, yeah, can relate. Like,
Mhm.
this is a very human trap that we can fall into, right? And even the way that like Brutus is pushing her, like, maybe it'll be good for you to go see him to remind yourself that he's just a man. He shouldn't have this like crushing hold over you, this agonizing pain that you're in. I love the beat where she says to Octavia, like, Octavia's kind of saying to her, like, "Oh, I'm sorry you're in pain." And she's like, "It's fine. Like, I'm used to being in pain." And
Mm.
that speaks to me of like just aging also. The thing
Yeah.
where like you get used to like waking up every day and your neck hurts. Or like
Uh-huh.
I've got like this bad knee that I walk around on all day long. Like, the way that we grow calluses, I mean, like emotionally,
Yeah.
that are able to like just endure this agony that we can like exist in perpetually. It's a really great depiction of like a fully realized person. We
Yeah.
talk so often about like strong women in fiction, and I think Servilia is like an exceptionally strong woman. She's just
Mhm.
not necessarily always on the side that we want her to be, and
Yeah.
that's great. That makes for
Yeah.
really compelling drama.
Yeah, I mean, this episode again, as I'm like looking through, like thinking about where we're gonna go next. This episode is so well done because like this is not like I don't have to make a hard pivot here because
Nope.
basically the Servilia and Octavia stuff does lead to a couple. Again, I thought really great scenes, which is between Octavia and Octavian, and
Hmm.
so first we get Octavian hanging out with Caesar. They're having the party, and Caesar asks Octavian, "How would you proceed? What would you do now that I'm in charge of Rome?" And he says, start a large program of public works, put people in jobs, and get 100 new senators who are his own creatures. And so Caesar says that he wants Octavian, clearly impressed by his answer and the boy's wit and smarts. He would like him to be at the pontiff's table. Octavian is like going to say, "I would make a very ill pontiff. I want to work on my poetry." But alas, he is going to be placed in this position. And so later, we'll see when Octavia has been tasked to go um, get the information, as the secret out of Octavia, out of Octavian. Sorry, this would be very confusing to the two of
Hmm.
them. Um, he's talking about again studying up to become a pontiff. Ultimately, the way she'll try to get him to reveal a secret is by letting him read some of his poetry first. It's very good.
It's kind of hilarious. The poetry is like so cringe too,
Yeah.
I love like Octavia's response. Octavia, like, "You don't like it." And she's like, "I'm just sick of poetry. Let's get to the point here." The relationship between them is like really interesting, and this puts like such a fascinating wrinkle in it because it's not a thing that I think that anybody would necessarily have like extrapolated from what we've seen so far. That like, oh, this kid's in love with his sister, right? And the fact
I
that
didn't read that at all, but then once you see it, you're like, "Oh yeah, okay, that's there." Yeah.
yep,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
the fact that how quickly it works.
Yeah, I mean, like, as soon as Servilia presents it, and then we circle back, and he's reading this poetry of like, I would like to play with you too, your delicate beak." It's like, oh my
Yeah.
god, kid,
Yeah.
like, you're really, like, going above and beyond here. But it's kind of, it's just so tragic for me because I, like, very much find myself, like, perceiving it all from Octavia's perspective of
Mhm.
like this girl is just so lost and being manipulated on at every angle. Like everybody's got an agenda, it seems like, except her, and
Yeah.
they're all just like shoving her in these various directions. The whole reason that she's even in this scenario is because her mother killed her husband at
Right.
like the, potential of like remarrying to an upjumped family with Pompey, who then like that all falls through. It's all just like so very sad. And she's so manipulated, right? And I think that in a lot of ways, she really like, embodies the plight of like women in this like male dominated society that like does not give them any kind of tools for recourse or any kind of autonomy or agency in their own decision making. Like it can't help but circle me back to like Varenus talking early on about the children. Like this is my
Mhm.
property in
Mhm.
regards to his daughter, and it really like reframes the way you look at it. We're dealing with like a lot of hard issues in this show in terms of like slavery and all of these really triggering topics, right, Grace? But like
Mhm.
it's easy to lose sight of the fact that like what's like really the distinction between this girl and the slaves fundamentally, like she's ultimately the property actually of her brother, because he's like the man of the house at this point, or will be at least when he becomes of age. And it's just very alien to the way that we perceive things now, and it does like just engender a lot of sympathy for the poor girl as she's being like shoved in these various directions.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so ultimately he's going to sh she's gonna ask about Caesar's affliction, and he's gonna say, "Oh, I lied." Like, "Oh, well, then the 2 of you are lovers then. You must have slept together in the room." It's like, "No, no, 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 no." Like, and I love this. I says, "Why do you care about Caesar's affliction? You don't even like him." It's like, "Yeah, no, but I think that if you're willing to keep it a secret, it's worth hearing." I thought was like the best reason to get someone
It's a
hyped.
great play. What else are you gonna say there? Like, why do
Yeah,
you really care? That's a
yeah,
pretty good angle of approach,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And then Octavian will, instead of revealing Caesar's affliction, he says, "I have a secret that it's worth keeping, which is I've actually tortured and killed a man." It's like, and so again, I think like, I'm keeping tabs on Niobe Baby Watch, which is now this information is, out to one more person at least. So that seems not great, but I like the way that scene worked in terms of she's like, you don't have any other secrets to tell. It's just this one secret you have. And he's like, ah, au contraire, first of all, I love you. And also, also I tortured and killed a man. So,
I love her underestimating him in that
yeah,
way and being like, "BS, you didn't torture and kill anybody." He's like, "Oh, no, I totally did. That
yeah.
guy with no thumbs," you know?
Well, yeah, that's right. Well, at one point he's like, well, I at least helped. It's like, which is true. Cause Pula, I think, does do most of the torturing and killing. Yeah.
It's true. They do a great job, I think, circling back on what they've done already, right? And like
Yeah.
making the things that have happened in the show like important in terms of like impacting future events, the way that like
Right.
these truths are revealed and stuff. It's a great play. And I think, again, like it's a really sad situation for Octavia, but I think that we come out of this whole dynamic with like a little bit, you have to come away with a little bit of appreciation for Octavian and his political acumen, his savvy, his like,
Yeah.
passive insight or whatever, Grace, right? Like he's able to like clock her immediately. Like he
Hmm.
knows what's going on here.
Hmm.
And he will then like capitalize on the opportunity and bed his sister. And then ultimately, like in the aftermath, be like, okay, so like you clearly are gonna ask me about this affliction again, right? Like this is the whole reason that you're doing this, which makes it so much darker that seemingly he understands that this is not like actually emotionally what she wants at all, but is willing to like capitalize on the opportunity only then to like kind of corner her in the truth of the situation after the fact. Like he wants this bad enough that he doesn't care why she's doing it. He's just gonna like take it for what it's worth and go with it, which is
Right.
like very sad. And really, like the two of them are so tragic, and you can't help but look at Atia like, what a terrible mother you are. You clearly have like not done a good job with these two children.
Well, I was gonna say because we lead into the scene where they will sleep together, and then Atia finds out she's gonna strike Octavian. And the thing that's so this scene is wild to me is that like I feel like she's pretty right here to be like, you pervert, you slept with your sister. I know that Octavian has just slept with his sister, but he also says, "I am your son, but I am not your child." I do like that line.
Yeah, it's a great line. Yeah.
And then Octavia is going to be like, "Hey, listen, you killed my husband. So like, on the scheme of things that are bad, that one is bad." And she's like, "No. I did not. I told you I didn't. You abased yourself for a lie. Servilia is the liar, you fool. The ease to which she gaslights her own daughter is wild.
I had a teacher when I was in high school, Grace. This is
Uh-huh.
like a real deviation, but it's relevant.
You do it.
And I got in trouble as I was wont to do in high school.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, no, 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 I didn't do the thing. I didn't do the thing. I didn't do the thing until like it really started getting bad and the pressure came down. And I was like, I said to my math teacher, whose name was Don Johnson, I can't write this
Uh-huh.
stuff. And I was
Yes.
like, listen, Don Johnson, I did the thing
Uh-huh.
between me and you. And he's like, no, that's the worst choice you could have made right now. When you're this deep in a lie, you need to double down.
Yeah,
You
for
can
real.
never admit the truth. You've gone too far already. So I'm going to
Mhm.
pretend you didn't tell me that. And you're going to like hold the lie against the headmaster. And I did. I just doubled down and took the advice of my math teacher, Don
Wow.
Johnson.
Go
Thank you.
go Don Johnson. Yeah.
I know, really.
Yeah.
He had my back. He was a really good
Uh-huh.
teacher. He was furious at me for this
Oh,
situation,
yes.
which maybe you could put the pieces of together across many podcasts if you go back through the TM Philly iconography. But it's fundamentally where Atty is at. Like she's too deep. You can't. There comes a point where like you can't use the survivor tactic anymore. Of like, well, I'm going to engender trust by admitting to you that I lied and making it seem like you're the one person I'm willing to admit to you I lied about. Like Atia, there's no way out of this. If she acknowledges, like, yeah, I killed Glabius, but you're better off for it. Like, look how much better your life is now. We hated Glabius. And like, she just can't. You have to toe the line. And so while it is like contemptuous that she so easily gaslights her daughter, I do have to applaud her for her commitment to the lie, Grace, because like that's the only move left for her at this point. You can never acknowledge the truth. Much to your point, like once you start acknowledging the truth gets out there and it's probably going to come back to haunt you at some point.
Well, Servilia is haunted by Timon and his men. It's so weird. We have Timon, but I don't see. Is there a Pumbaa? I don't see a Pumbaa
No,
around.
no, Pumbaa. I think that was one of his horses.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
love Octavian being like, "Are you still effing my
That's
mother?"
right.
He's like, whenever she'll have me." He's like, "Yeah, that would explain the over familiarity." You know, it's like it's so
So
funny.
good.
This kid is so good.
It's good. Yeah, they're going to Timon won't actually participate. He's just gonna get his men to go and do that. They're going to attack Servilia and sort of her consort of folks and then cut her hair off and strip her naked. And I will say, Timon looks pretty regretful when this is happening. Maybe I'm on the wrong side of history. Are we the baddies? I think he's saying. As he watches
Have you the
Servilia on the ground.
patties?
Yeah.
Timon, like, yeah, I feel for this guy as he's like become the cat's paw for Atia as we watched across the season. He does like a lot of dark stuff. At what point is it like worth it again in terms of like just very candidly, right? Like the sexual drives of these men, like pursuing them, driving them to like do these things that they're like regretful of. I think there's like a clear mirroring between Timon and between Octavian, who's like laying in bed
Yeah.
with Octavia after the fact, like, no, this isn't just like culturally wrong. This is unambiguously wrong. Why do you think like so many like terrible things or children are like born out of relationships of incest? Clearly the gods do not approve, but like I'm down to do it anyway, you know? And the way that that's like kind of mirrored in time and like it's interesting. I do really feel for Servilia at the end. As bad as like everything that she's doing is, like you can't help but have sympathy for her. And I think that that's what's so clever about the writing in this show, that they're giving us a bunch of like really morally gray characters that you
Mhm.
can sympathize with throughout their machinations. Like none of them are like unambiguously good or bad. They're all like just pursuing their own agendas and willing to like discard morality when it serves their interest. But so many of them you can feel real sympathy for. I think
Mhm.
except for Atia, probably, who I still just love because she's so fun to watch, like
Yeah.
ruin all these people's lives.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty fun. All right, let's talk through quickly. We'll talk through Varanus basically, and Pula, which is he's a little bit bored by just coming home, not having a job really. He's trying to tell all of his this I believe he thinks it's his grandson, but it's actually his son trying to tell the
Yes.
story, who's crying, and he's like, I don't know. It turns out Lydie and Niobe have gone into, they're running the butcher shop, Vander's butcher shop. Rennis is pretty hesitant to take up the job of shopkeeper, but ultimately does it, and this is where he's going to run into the issue with Erastes and Erastes' men.
I was a prefect in the Evocati, Grace.
Yeah.
Caesar himself gave me a horse.
I love that line. Caesar gave me a horse. It's pretty good.
It's so good, dude. And I love like him and Pulo just like working the butcher shop, sitting down for a minute. Lydie's giving them hell, like get up,
learn by
off
sitting
your
down, basically. Yeah.
Him like telling the story of the elephants and terrifying the kid who is not his grandson or his son, but like actually like his stepson, I guess, right?
Right.
It's so fantastic. Like I have like no sense whatsoever of what's appropriate for a child because I've been out like just slaughtering men for the last 15 years. Yeah. It really like works for me so good. I really like, despite it all, the Erastes storyline like coming back. The idea that like, oh no, he's a big man now ever since like Pompey got like taken out of the picture. He's consolidated his power in like the kind of underworld, as it were. Like this guy's a mob boss, right? And it's a really interesting dynamic. We get a Graham McTavish sighting, which is like really fun. Like check another one off of like fun actors who turn up on Rome in like these tiny little parts. I know he was like a big beloved fan from Outlander, I think, and like one
he's
of
in
the
House of the
dwarves in Hobbit.
Dragon recently. Yep.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah, I like this a lot of Rennis. This idea of whether or not he's respected or not, and this man coming, and it's pretty brutal. I mean, the whole thing is, I'm gonna if you do not come and kneel at my feet, I will kill you. But first, I will brutalize your family, burn down your home. It's pretty awful. And the idea that like that man would come and basically see Caesar's men at the door is pretty fun. I think it's like, oh man, like, yeah, we totally messed with the wrong guy. Whether or not this like is over, I predict maybe not, but I do think Caesar being there to basically be like, hey, can you be a magistrate? Can you run for office? Therefore stopping Erastes' men from being able to slaughter Varenus' family. I liked it. I thought it was fun.
The experience of rewatching this again, like this was a one and done for me. I watched it like 15 years ago and never circled back. So most of it is like in the haze of memory of decade, right? But this scene I very explicitly remember because I remember getting so hype for them hiding their weapons. We've talked about it, like there's not a lot of like big giant epic battles, right? But there are little fights and scraps and stuff along the way. And so like Pulo and Varenus like stashing swords all over the house. Getting ready to like really kick some ass. Varenus like coming to the door with the two gladiuses. The gladius is like a specific type of short sword that these like Roman soldiers used that was really like honed and super sharp on the kind of front tips. Him like walking up to the entryway to their little foyer with these swords, only to get like the subversion of expectations as Caesar comes like storming in with this army of soldiers behind him. It's a really great bait and switch from like the editing and like whole like story momentum. And yeah, Erastes, what my favorite thing is like Erastes shows up, he doesn't get a look at like these 20 legionnaires blocking off the doorway and then just like turn and leave. He literally like walks up to these guys and mean mugs them like they're like the like British guard or whatever, and he's trying to see if he can get them to move, and I love the like quintessential like legionnaire move of like, we're just gonna like unsheath the sword like 1/10 of the way and be like,
I show you.
Yeah. You see the steel?
Yeah.
You see it? You want to see the rest of it? It's just so awesome. It's really like evocative from the Evocati.
Yeah. I mean, the last part here is as Pulo's watching all this happen, we get the reveal that he's gonna, go to Ariane and say, my mother was a slave. I was born from slaves. I will not kneel for anybody. I do think, once again, I think in terms of the complexities of people, this is interesting because Pulo's been pretty happy to go with the flow. He's very much a come with guy. And seemingly through this whole thing, he must know that Caesar is, in some way, I don't know whether or not he believed the whole time that Caesar would, uphold the Republic and he was just doing it because he had to, and that he would sort of return, and it's just these sort of bad seeds that get out of the way. This feels a little bit like it comes out of nowhere, except my read on it is that this is a little bit of Pulo grandizing himself a little bit in front of this woman he likes, in the sense
Mhm.
that this is why I'm upset, not because actually I'm jealous of my friend who's getting all the love and attention, despite, I knew that he's been conflicted the whole time. I think this is a really interesting place to sort of place some potential conflict back in the mix between Pulo and Varenis, who have basically been buddies since episode 2. Like, once they get back from that initial trip, and basically, like, Varenis saves Pulo's life by getting the man to come and do the surgery, like, they've been pretty buddy. And so
Mhm.
I this to me feels like there's maybe I'm wrong, but this idea that Pulo is not super happy with Caesar, I feel like it's not because it's Caesar, it's because Pulo's not getting anything out of this. He's just sitting and drinking and sort of meandering about.
That's a really interesting interpretation. I like that a lot. I mean, I think certainly like the little bit of tension as he's looking at Varenis and like, oh, I want this. It enters a little bit of like tension back into the relationship, certainly. But I guess my read of it is that, our needs change as people. We change over time. And when we met Pulo in the beginning of this thing, he's a very straightforward and simple guy. He's really all about like just feeding his base pleasure. And
Yeah.
he's in the midst of like a foreign campaign, right? He's a legionnaire, like fighting in the north. Like these guys, death is cheap and easy. And
Mhm.
like how many of their compatriots to get buried in like shallow graves in distant lands, as it were. So the simplicity of this guy off the bat of like, I just want women and I want to drink and I want to gamble and I want to like enjoy my time that I'm not fighting and killing until they point me to fight and kill somebody else again. Like part of this homecoming, this is really different than the first time they came back to Rome because now presumably they're done. Like Varenis says, no more soldiering for me. They're like taking off their armor and about to like find lives. They're about to be butchers, Grace. They're going to
Mhm.
go be shopkeepers, much to
Mhm.
Varenis's chagrin. So Pulo's needs have changed and his expectations for his life have changed, right? He doesn't have to fear that tomorrow morning he's going to wake up and like go die in a ditch because some Gaul is going to put an axe in his belly. And now, like, what is his life? Like, how long can these kind of hollow pursuits fulfill him? And he's realizing like he wants more than that, I think. And I think there's a little bit of my read where I'm like, for the first time ever, this man can contemplate his thoughts about politics. Like he was very willing to go with Caesar because Caesar serves him as long
Mhm.
as he's Caesar's man, like
Yeah.
Caesar rising up, like, the high tide raises all ships kind of a deal, right?
Right.
And now, like, I think he is aggrandizing in front of her a little bit and trying to present himself as more like a man of thought and philosophy. But I think the other side of that is that he is able to engage in thought and philosophy a little bit more and reflect on like what his life has been and what it's going to be going forward. I also find the relationship between he and Ariane like really enchanting and
Mhm.
charming, right?
Mhm.
It's such like an atypical depiction, certainly of a slave owner and a slave, but of these men who we see like seem so empowered with the notion that they're entitled to take whatever the hell they want, right? And that is literally the society that has like been built up around them. They are entitled to take whatever they want, even if it means like sleeping with their sister, and that's effed up. So I love like Pulo operating outside of that, a little bit more like nobility in this low man that was born a slave.
This episode is written by Alexander Cunningham, which I think is interesting because there's a line in here in particular that feels so poignant, yet like it's a thing that like feels like it's written in a modern show, which is Pulo says, "You don't smile much," and she says, "Well, what? Do you want me to smile more?" He says, "No, I want you to be happy," which I really like because there's this classic thing that women
Yes.
get told a lot by men, like, "I want you to smile more," and so that normally comes from the fact that like, can't you just placate around me? Like, don't be miserable. Like, be happy that you're around me and with me and whatever. And so this subversion of that, which is, do you want me to smile more? He says, no, you're not smiling because you're not happy. That's what I want. I want you to be happy. I really love that line of writing. I think it's maybe not a coincidence this episode is written, yeah, by a woman in Alexandra Cunningham. So,
Yeah, no, it's
yeah.
really insightful. I think that the way that we're using ancient Rome to like interrogate a lot of the failings of our modern cultures is really pretty interesting. And that's a really poignant observation. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Let's put some people in the Colosseum that has yet to be built. Rich, you are up first. I put Caesar in last week, who ultimately I think I pushed my hand a little bit, but defeated Cleopatra. But who do you want to enter into the Colosseum this week?
I want to put Varenus into the
Okay.
Colosseum. I think that he got a horse from Caesar himself.
So good.
I
So
think
good.
he manages to like come home to a much more receptive homecoming than last time. His children are delighted to see him. His not children
Yep.
are even delighted to
That's
see him.
right. That's
His
right.
wife is like completely like taken by her passions. He's got like twice as many slaves on a soldier's wage because his wife has built up an incredible business for him to retire to. But he doesn't even have to take that incredible business. By the end of this thing, he's getting up jumped to become like a representative under Caesar. I think that Varenus, he like doesn't have to deal with the Rasties and have like a fight to the death in his backyard. Like Varenus comes up pretty big in this episode, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree. The person I'm going to put in, I feel like I don't think I could possibly make a case for why they should win because of the last scene of the episode, but everything up until then, I feel like is pretty good. Even if I feel like down the road, these are moves, these are decisions that she makes that maybe won't work out, but at the time being, they work out and I can see why she did it. So this is Servilia that I'm going to put in there, who I don't think
Yes.
we've put in yet. And it's only because she has this scene where, like, ultimately Octavia is going to tell her mother that it's like Servilia who knows that, like, they found one of the men who killed Glabius, and then she's going to basically turn around and then go seek revenge. But up until that point, I feel like it's such a compelling episode for Servilia in terms of, as evil as it is, to be like, could you go seduce your brother to get the information so I could, take down Caesar? That'd be great. So yeah, I think it's a very compelling episode for Servilia, even if I probably can't argue she should win, and probably Varenus should win.
I mean, it's very evil, but I think that what's so like incredible is how effective she is, that she
Yeah.
does get Octavia to do this. And
Yeah.
very ironically, as I'm reflecting back on Don Johnson's advice to me, I can't
Uh-huh.
help but recall that the entire situation happened because somebody else blew up my spot, much
Right.
like Octavia does. It's
Yeah.
one of these things where, like, when you tell young people things that are like, but don't tell anybody, you need to count on them telling somebody.
True.
So, like, I think that's like really Servilia's failing here is
Yeah.
like putting too much faith in this young woman to be able to like hold up against interrogation. I love Servilia. Season 2 of The Wheel of Time just wrapped to date us a little bit, Grace, and Lindsay Duncan appeared on that show to like incredible fanfare, really like stole some scenes out of the middle of the season. And so I'm delighted to keep talking about Lindsay Duncan. And I think Servilia is such a delightful character, but I have to agree that ultimately, like, she gets found out by the
Yeah.
end. Like, as good as the whole plan is, her spot gets blown up. She's like completely demoralized, dehumanized, and like dishonored by the end of this. And it's really tragic.
Mhm.
And Varenus probably should carry on.
All right. Well, that puts Varenus on the top of the leaderboard, close to. He has 3 wins along with Caesar's. It's just that Caesar has not yet lost when he's gone to the Colosseum. Varenus lost once against Octavian, nevertheless. All right.
Yeah, that tracks. That
Yeah.
tracks. I love it. Varenus, prefect of the Evocati. Yeah, dominate the gladiators. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. You got a scene you want to highlight in particular, Rich? One that was a favorite of yours?
God, this might sound effed up, but I'm going to go with the opening scene of the episode because I think
Yeah.
that it's one of these things where, like, we've heard about the elephants
Uh-huh.
so
Yeah,
many
that's right.
times,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
We keep like talking about the elephants, and I think that there is a metaphor there also that Cato is talking about of like they say these men are big men. Right.
Yeah.
Like when Niobe talks about Erastes coming up, she's like, ever since Pompey went down, Erastes has dominated the docks. He is a big man now. That's like literally the terminology. And so Cato and Scipio, despite being defeated, they are big men. They are men of like prominence. Even after their losses, there's this whole entourage that's going to follow them to Utica, right? And I think there's a little bit of the metaphor in like they're so big, once they get knocked down, they can't get back up again.
Mhm.
This is Cato and Scipio. They've been knocked down. They can't get back up again,
Mhm.
despite what the song tells you. And I think that it was like a clever use of the elephant. I hope that no animals were harmed in the making of this episode of
Same.
television, but just to be able to like bring a little bit of that actually onto the screen. This is one of these things where we could have like kept talking about elephants across 22 episodes and never
Yeah.
seen
Never
one.
see one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I'm gonna point out one of my favorite little moments that we haven't talked about yet, which is the newsreaders announcing that
Yes.
Kato and Scipio are dead, and then he gives the worst ad read of all time. He's like, "Yeah, bread, Roman bread for Romans."
Miller's
He's
Guild.
so over it. Yeah, I think he's read the same ad for 2 years straight by this point, so he's a
Yeah.
little bit over it. I thought that was very funny. This is kind of like when you're listening to a podcast that you listen to all the time, and it's like, yeah, they're still being sponsored by what's stamp.com or whatever, and it's like it's been like 5 years and they always have to do the ad reads. So like, yes, stamps.com, makes mail easier or whatever. I like the ad read.
Dial a mattress.
I
You
like
need a
him being over
mattress.
the
We all
bread guild. Yeah.
sleep on mattresses. I do love how contemporary it sounds. Roman grade for true Romans. He is like so down. The
He
the
chucks it.
newsreader
Chucks the
is
scroll. Yeah.
the newsreader is like quietly one of my favorite scenes every
Agreed.
episode. He does this stuff with his hands.
Yeah.
Like this guy is making the most of this role.
It's
And
great.
I am like delighted for him to come on screen every week. I'm glad that you picked it because
Yeah.
I specifically didn't talk about it because I knew you would be psyched to talk about the ad read.
Perfect. Great. Yeah, no, he's a delight. He's a treat. All right. That is episode 9. We'll be back tomorrow with our Friday episode for season 1, episode 10. Let me see if I have the episode in front of me. It is Triumph. That should be good. That should be good.
Who's Triumph? I wonder.
Yeah. In the meantime, Rich, where can people find you? What are you up to?
At DM Philly on Twitter. I'm doing a bunch of stuff. I'm talking about Tales from the Loop with you. Just wrapped up Ahsoka, just wrapped up the Wheel of Time. We got a couple of post-show podcasts over there going on for that. I'm talking about the Winter King with Prez. Dimension 20 coverage as we're talking about Burroughs and myself and the great Dr. Melissa Woodward. So a lot of TV to be talking about.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Hi from Grace, at Go for Grace, talking movies, Our Flag Means Death, the morning show. Lots of stuff from me. We'll be back tomorrow as we continue talking about Rome every single day.